My guest today is Divyesh Muni, a chartered accountant by profession, but a mountaineer by passion. When are you going to go to Everest?
Maybe when we are in our late 70s or 80s, by then somebody would have put a ropeway up. I've said this earlier also. If somebody even pays me to go and climb Everest, I would not do that. I don't want to be part of that circus. Somebody very humorously said that you don't marry a woman for her height. So you don't climb a mountain just for its height. We identified Chamshen.
Chamshen, okay.
And it was the only 7,000 meter peak that had not been climbed in that whole group. So incidentally, we teamed up with a British climber, Victor Saunders, Suzanne Jensen and Andy Parkin. Vinita and myself were the part of the Indian team. That night, unfortunately, they got hit by an avalanche. Through that tent,
Airborne.
nearly 40-50 feet in the air, sort of, and went straight into the crevasse.
So the whole tent and him inside the crevasse.
So he was wrapped up in his tent and he went into the crevasse. He had a fracture of the sacral bone. It is miraculous that he survived. Crawl away from there for 2 kilometers.
How? With a broken back?
Yeah, but he's an amazing person.
Crazy, oh my God, can't even imagine.
He crawled 2 kilometers away to get away from any other avalanche that may
Like
come.
can hit, yeah.
Don Goodman, he's a great inspiration to me, a wonderful leader in his own right. So he asked me once, Divyesh, what is your definition of success? How do we define whether our expedition will be successful or no?
Right.
Are you going to say that if we reach the summit, is it going to be success? What is it? And we sort of discussed this in detail and we decided that our criteria for success of this expedition is going to be A, that every moment we spend in the mountains, we are going to have a good time. B, we are going to come back as better friends than what we went in.
Yes. Welcome to Everest Within, episode 2. My guest today is Divyesh Muni, a chartered accountant by profession, but a mountaineer by passion. And I have to say that he's one of the finest mountaineers that India has produced. He has more than 40 plus summits to his name, and out of them, 26 are first ascents. And these are first ascents of many peaks in the Ladakh region and all over the Indian Himalaya. I know Divyesh by when we first actually connected back in 2014, when I was actually doing a talk about my Manaslu climb. Divyesh bhai is also the vice president of Himalayan Club. So he had put together a talk where I gave a presentation about my Manaslu summit. And then the year later, we also collaborated to raise funds for the Nepal rebuild effort. So really excited to have Divyesh on the conversation and hear about some of the amazing work, some groundbreaking, path-breaking work that he has done in the Eastern Karakoram region. 40 years of climbing. I mean, I am 45 years myself. It's literally, I can't, imagine. And again, one of the finest mountaineers from India, and a story that I don't think many people in today's mountaineering world actually even know. Welcome, Divyesh. How are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
Good.
Great.
So Divyesh, I wanted to start by asking you, you were a CA and your academic background is as a CA. How did you go from being a CA to getting this mountain bug or, falling in love with mountains? What did that journey look like?
So I became a CA after I got the mountain bug.
Okay, I got that wrong.
So I got the mountain bug when I was, I think, around 8 years old.
Okay.
And my first exposure to the mountains, to the Himalaya, was on a family trip to Kashmir.
Okay, wow.
And my parents, in those days, my father used to take us in a car, drive all the way up from here.
So from Mumbai to Kashmir?
Yeah, we would go over there and we went to Kashmir. And as a young, I was just 8 years old. the impact it had on me was so much. I realized it later on that this is one of the childhood memories I still have. I remember Pahalgam, I remember Chandanwadi and all those places, what it was in 1971.
Wow.
So that remained in me, and the exposure then I got later on was when I was in school. At that point of time, a neighbor of mine, he would uh, take all his cousins to Lonavala,
Okay.
and he would take them for treks around there. So my exposure came with these trips to Lonavala, and he used to take us for a week. We used to stay in a bungalow in Lonavala, and then we used to go for treks. So first exposure, going for a trek to Rajmachi, going to Duke's Nose, and this was, it was so fascinating for me, and it was something I just loved doing.
Wow.
And then I started pestering him that you need to take me more often. And then he was studying his law, and at some point of time he couldn't take the time off.
Okay.
So just to stop me from pestering him, he sort of introduced me to a club,
Okay.
a very active club in Mumbai at that time, Explorers and Adventurers.
But is it still around? I have not heard.
It is, but it is not that active as it was in those days.
Okay.
And then that was just when I got into college. So I was in my 11th.
Okay.
I had all the time in the world.
Okay.
So and then it was only that. I mean, every weekend we used to be out trekking all over the Sahyadri. And I got good encouragement from the seniors in the club that time.
Okay.
They introduced me. They asked me, why don't you go and do your adventure course, which was more of a fun kind of a thing. Then once I went there to NIM, I did my adventure course from Nehru Institute of Mountaineering.
Okay.
And then once I got there, I got to know about basic mountaineering, advanced course. So I registered and enrolled myself for the courses. And then there was no looking back. So I started my CA studies well after I had done my advanced course, and I'd already climbed my first major summit, Kamet. So after that, I started my articleship training for my CA.
So when was Kamet?
So Kamet, I climbed in 1985.
Okay.
And I started my articleship in 85 after I came back from.
Wow. So tell me more about Kamet, because today Kamet is the tallest climbable mountain within entire boundary of India, because Nanda Devi, you can't climb Nanda Devi, and Kanchenjunga, while it is some part is in India, it's still shared with Nepal.
Correct.
Kamet is currently the tallest mountain in India.
True.
So what was your experience like? As a 19-year-old, I can't even imagine. As a 19-year-old, I remember, just being given pocket money by parents and, just chilling away to glory in my life. That was, my like, oh, weekend pe kya karenge, movie dekhenge, khana khayenge, chill marenge, and that is, what I did. And here is some 19-year-old who is, thinking of climbing Kamet. And this is also back in 1985. This is not like aaj where, mountaineering is still a little popular and people are getting into it. So what was your experience like? How did you, today it's even difficult to get permit for Kamet. So how did you even get, what was the whole procedure like?
So I had just completed my advanced course, and I had done one expedition before that. That was to a very simple peak where I learned about what is expedition. This was in the Gangotri region. So after I came back from my advanced course, I became a member of a club in Delhi, Climbers and Explorers Club.
Okay, it's the same that was in Bombay.
CEC. No.
This
is completely different.
Okay.
So some common friend introduced me. He said that you're so keen on mountaineering, why don't you join? And they were very active at that point of time. So I became a member, and then I forgot all about it. And then one day I got a circular from Climbers and Explorers Club saying that we are organizing an expedition to Kamet.
Okay.
Those who are interested can apply.
Okay.
So I didn't know how these things work.
Right.
But I said, okay, if they've said apply, may as well apply. Why? Nothing wrong in trying.
Right.
So I sent the application and I forgot all about it. And then I got busy because I had my final BCom examinations. And it so happened that I came back from the last examination of my BCom, I came home and there was a letter saying that I've been selected for the expedition.
Wow.
And I was amazed. I said, how did this happen? Because except for the secretary of the club whom I had met briefly while giving my application form, I had no connects. I didn't know anybody else. Of course, there is a climber in Mumbai, Homiar Mistry. I knew him well and he had also applied for the thing.
Okay.
So I immediately got in touch with him. I said, Homer, I've been selected, but I don't know anything. What is to be done? So he said, don't worry, you don't worry, I'm going to be there. So not a problem. So the only thing is I trained very hard for it. I was in those days training in martial arts a lot. So I used to be very fit.
Okay.
And plus additional because of Comet and the height of Comet and all, sort of went to the extent of sometimes overdoing the training also. But there's a burning desire to achieve something. So I did that. So I was physically fit. I had done my advanced course. The question in front of me was I didn't know anybody except Homer.
Right.
So it dawned on me that what about the safety? Because I don't know anybody.
Right.
I don't know any members. I don't know who's coming, who's not coming, whatever.
Right.
So here I set a mental sort of a limit for myself that I'm going to go to the mountain
Okay.
with an idea to learn. So whatever I achieve over there, it's great for me. Whatever height I reach, whatever camp I reach is fantastic.
Right.
So I'm going to keep that in mind, that I don't want to be over ambitious about climbing the
Getting to
mountain,
the summit or
getting to the summit. I have to understand where my limit is.
Right.
And I should go to the extent where I can come back safely.
Right.
Because this was the first time I was going on such a high mountain. I didn't know how my body would acclimatize. I didn't know how I would cope with, the pressures and what kind of technicality would be there on the mountain.
Right.
I didn't know how to even research the mountain much.
We didn't have internet back in the day.
Those days there was no internet. So I went with that attitude and it was an amazing experience for me. For me, it gave me a lot of confidence. I ultimately climbed the mountain, although I was put in team B.
I thought you were in team 3 because I was reading the report and the first team, had to give up. The second team gave up and then
So I was in team B. There were two teams.
Okay.
And I say I believe a lot in fate. So I was in team B and team A consisted of 5 Sherpas, 3 of the top climbers at that point of time.
Okay.
In the group.
Okay.
Who had a lot of experience of earlier expeditions and all that. I was put in team B.
Okay.
Where the leader of the expedition was there.
Okay.
And there were only 2 juniors. Like me, there was another guy who was a green hornet, like just a new fellow. And to support us, we only had a cook and a hap.
Okay.
No Sherpas also.
Okay.
So after the first team went very high up, they were within about 500 feet of the summit, and then they had to turn back because the snow conditions were very bad and all.
Okay.
So when they came back, that only team B was left to go, and we thought that we'll climb the peak using the footsteps already made so high up.
Correct. Till at least 500 feet.
Yeah, and then we'll push further. What we didn't realize is that through the night, the wind was so strong that it covered all the footsteps.
Right.
There was nothing.
Right.
When we got up at 2 in the morning and we started off in that biting cold, we had no directions of direction, no footsteps, nothing. So we sort of pushed on.
Right.
And then at some point of time, we realized we were on the wrong route. And while trying to, yeah,
So how did it work back then? Did you have like Sherpa guides opening the route?
No,
what
no.
going on?
The team B had no Sherpas. The Sherpas are all gone for the team A. They never even thought that team B had any chance, basically. So when we went high up, and then we realized we were on the wrong path. And when we were trying to adjust our route, we got caught in a wind slab avalanche. So we were thrown down by about 200 feet.
Okay.
And we came down with the wind slab.
Okay.
And I remember I was my 2 feet in the air, my head below in the snow, and I was totally shaken up. And the whole lot of us just ran down back to camp. We were lucky, there was no fatality.
came back down to
We
the
came back to the camp,
Okay.
and I had snow all over me because of that. Snow gone in my boots and all that. So I said, it's okay. Whatever has happened, happened. I just went into the tent, changed into it, went into my sleeping bag. I wanted to warm up. And in the meantime, there was a lot of drama outside. There was a lot of disappointment because Team B also failed. What are you going to do? How are you going to do?
Right.
I fell asleep because of the tiredness.
Right.
And somebody woke me up saying, Devesh, we wanted to ask you, we are going to have another attempt. Would you like to join?
Okay.
So it spontaneously came out. Yeah, why? Yeah, I'll join. I mean, as a 19-year-old, you don't think about anything. You just say yes to everything.
You would not have done that today, I'm assuming.
I would not have. Frankly, I wouldn't have done. And then I said, yeah, but how? This looks like very difficult. The snow was chest deep.
Right.
At that point. The condition at that time, and it was thin powder snow.
Right.
Chest deep, and it was extremely exhausting to move even 10 feet. Forget about doing from Meads Col, which is 23,500 to Kamet is 25,500. So 2,000 feet of climb.
Yeah.
So he said, no, what we have decided to do is we are going to push the camp further.
So we put a higher camp.
We'll put a camp higher so that they have a better chance. I said, when? He's saying, right now.
Okay.
So I just come back in the morning, taken about 2 hours of rest, fallen asleep, and we were to leave within an hour and
for a new camp.
Push to whatever height we could. We did that.
Okay.
We sort of pushed. We got up. We again had the support only of the Hap and the cook. And of course, one or two members from the earlier team A also joined. So we sort of made up a mixed team of the two groups. And we put a higher camp. And the next day we summited, came back totally dehydrated, exhausted. I was so dehydrated that I was urinating blood that time. I had no idea about safety or what you need to do. It was just that craze of, someone says, no, arrogance of youth. You just do the stuff. But that was it. But that gave me a lot of confidence that, yes, there is a possibility of me continuing in mountaineering. And it gives you a lot of confidence to do that kind of a climb at that time also.
And all the skill set that you had built and all the physical fitness that you had worked on, all was also paying off, which allowed you to push through.
Correct. Yeah.
So what other learnings did you have?
So what I learned over there was to see how these big expeditions work. We had a 13-member team, lot of Sherpas, fully supported, and of course in those days, though the difference was we did all the load ferries also.
Okay.
It was not only the Sherpas. We had instructors from NIM also at that point of time who had joined this expedition. So they were doing all the decision making.
Right.
Basically. So I was, as a young, inexperienced guy, I was just observing what is happening, how they plan things, how the movement is there. I was seeing how group dynamics is working, how people, it was very funny to me how everybody is too focused on the summit.
Right.
And how differences of opinion crop up because of people's ambition to summit somehow, and how people try and manipulate movements. They were already calculating that if on day X I'm at this camp, on day so-and-so I'll be at this camp, so I should have a chance to go on the summit
earlier than I do.
And for me, the fact that I had decided that for me summit is not important became a boon for me.
Right.
I was very relaxed and I was enjoying everything.
Right.
I was not driven by just the summit.
Yeah.
So that was a lot of learning for me. That if you don't get fixated on the summit, you actually learn to enjoy the mountain on a day-to-day basis.
So where did things go on from here? Like, you have climbed Kamet and, there's this now, hey, this is so amazing. What next? What was your thought process after Kamet?
So after Kamet, my thought process, basically by then I had already started my chartered accountancy, and a lot of focus was also on that because career, education.
Everyone has to pay bills.
Yes.
At the end of the day.
No, and that was the focus also
Right.
in life. You also need to do your profession.
Right.
So I was very open to go into the mountains. I mean, I had no such thing that I want to do this or that.
Right.
But because of having climbed Kamet, uh, people had a certain image of me.
Right.
And it sort of gave me a break. And then I met a group of climbers from Maharashtra in the Kamet base camp itself.
Okay.
And then leader of that team was D.T. Kulkarni. And then after about a year, he sent out a feeler to me whether I would be keen to join Everest expedition at that point of time. So, yeah, I mean, Everest sort of, you have stars in your eyes and, you think that that's the thing to do in life. And wow, what an opportunity and all that. And then I said, yes, definitely. So 4 of us, me, um, my partner, Vinita, she's, of course, we got married much later, but she was on the team, and a friend of ours, Theo, and his partner, Malika. And all of us joined into that team to go for Everest. We were supposed to go somewhere in 91, I think.
Okay.
For the Everest expedition.
Okay.
So in order to train for that, they arranged a pre-Everest expedition, and that was to a peak called Brigupant. So my friend Homer Mistry, who was with me on Kamet, and who really helped me a lot over there. So thanks to his guidance, that finally I could climb Kamet also.
Right.
So Homer was also on the team for Everest. And he had suggested a very technical route on a peak called Brigupant.
Okay.
As a pre-Everest climb. So I went for that expedition to Brigupant.
Like, so who was organizing this expedition to Brigupant?
So this was from a team from Pune, who was organizing Sports and Research Organization Pune, and they had planned this trip to Everest under the leadership of Dr. D.T. Kulkarni.
And so civilian expedition to...
So it was a civilian expedition. It was supposed to be the first civilian expedition from India to go for, purely civilian expedition to go from India to Everest.
Okay.
And then Brigupant expedition took place, and that expedition taught me a lot. And I basically decided at that point of time that I'm not going to go ever on an Everest expedition. I don't want to be part of that circus. So
So I'll definitely come back to that, because that is a point that I do want to understand more about Brigupant and what happened in Brigupant and what created that mindset for you. But what happened after Brigupant? Like,
So-
what did your life take on? Like,
So Brigupant really shook me up because it was not a very pleasant experience. I learned a lot, but technically we had extended ourselves. We had done a fantastic technical climb up the face of Brigupant. We had opened route. We were all the while with the Sherpas also, who were part of the team.
right.
But it taught me a lot on climbing terms, but on human terms, I had a very bad experience
Okay.
that time.
Okay.
And I mean, all my fantasies of mountaineers evaporated. You have these things, cliches now. Mountaineering builds character, mountaineering builds friendship. These kind of things just evaporated over there, and you see that what is happening in real life also happens in the mountain. Let's be realistic about it.
Right.
That people are people, and you'll have different aspects of people. Basically, what I saw is people are driven to the mountains for different reasons.
Right.
So if you are driven to the mountains for your personal name and fame, the way you are going to behave, the way you are going to take decisions in the mountains is totally different. And if you're going to the mountains for your self-enjoyment, for experiencing the mountains and experiencing nature, for the love of the mountains, then your decision making is
Very
different. It's a
very
very different thing. And that's where the clash took place. So most of the people on Brigupan, they had their eye on Everest and they were only looking at that. Whereas we were very clear, some of us, that we were there to climb the mountain because of the love of mountains.
Right.
And incidentally, if we could go to Everest, fantastic.
Right.
So that was the way. And therefore, our objectives were not matching. And it led to a lot of friction, etc. So because of that, then I was sort of thinking, what do we do? And somebody very nicely suggested that, okay, Devesh, this is the time for you to do something on your own. Why don't you do something on your own rather than going? I was just thinking that in India, I had seen Comet.
Right.
I had seen the kind of group dynamics that took place. Again, they were all summit oriented.
Right.
Focused only on summit. I had seen what happened in Brigupan, the same kind of a story.
Right.
So I said, let's just do a trip on our own to enjoy the mountains. So my friends Theo and Malika, Vinita, myself, and another couple from Baroda, we decided let's do a small, nice technical peak. Let's enjoy the mountains and come back.
Right.
So we looked around and we were suggested this mountain called Kagbhusan.
Okay.
So Kagbhusan is just about 5,000 odd meters, 18,500 feet. It's a nice rock peak.
Right.
Somewhere in the same valley towards Kamet, but you take a bifurcation off at Gamsali and
Correct. There's Kagbhusan.
So I started learning. Okay, when you're doing things on your own, how do you organize an expedition?
Right.
I mean, you learned it in your advanced course, but that's theoretical most of the time.
Right.
So here, then I started researching. So this peak had been climbed only once earlier by Frank Smythe.
Okay. Wow. So followed some very...
So that was 1937. So it had not been climbed since then.
And any attempts, or even yours was going to be the...
No, there was no attempts. I mean, it's just a small peak in the area. It's a very beautiful looking peak, but people were just passing by it, maybe never. Yeah. So it's a beautiful rock peak. We said, okay, let's do that, and we sort of organize it on our own. Everything from food to getting some funds from people, because we were students in those days. Getting everything together, equipment, beg, borrow, steal, everything. Managing, to do everything from arranging transport, packing. So we learned the whole process in that. And then the climb was really amazing. Unfortunately, there was an accident also. Again, luckily, none of us were injured too badly. But we managed to summit the peak. And there was a lot of satisfaction in doing that.
So, again, what was the style of climbing the peak? In terms of, did you have an army of Sherpas lifting your gear, putting it up on the mountain, fixing ropes and, pulling you up the mountain? Or was this,
no,
how a big guided expedition would be?
No, yeah, as I said, we were totally on our own.
Right.
The only staff that we had, of course, these, we had arranged for local, mules to come and drop us to base camp.
Right.
And we had a cook with us. That's something we didn't want to do. Base camp, we didn't want to cook for ourselves.
Right.
And it so happened that the support guys who were supposed to drop us at base camp had a very tough time. So it ended up us guiding the mules up the moraine. Literally, we had to pull and push and then reload. So we even learned how to tie up a load on the mule at that time. And we managed to somehow reach base camp. Unfortunately, when we reached base camp, our cook fell sick. So
no cook as well.
There was no cook also. So we sort of took turns cooking at that point of time. We did the recce of the mountain on our own, and we climbed it in our own steam. It's basically a good rock climb to the summit.
Okay.
So we did it in our own way.
And was there enough information from Frank Smythe's,
No, see, the only information, he was extremely acclimatized. He had already climbed Comet and come.
Okay.
And he had gone into this valley and he liked this peak. So he and his Sherpa, they went one day. They made the first attempt. They couldn't do it. They came back. The next day, they again teamed up. with somebody. They went and climbed the peak and came.
Came.
And that's all the information there
That's
was.
all the information. Did you see any human, things in like anything that they had left back?
No, absolutely nothing. It was,
Wow.
I mean, we went in 1990 and that was 1937. So there was absolutely nothing. We didn't even, I mean, he had not even written which direction they climbed from.
Okay.
So we went and visually looked at the peak and we sort of did one or two recce's and we found a good line to climb.
Right.
And that's what we did.
Wow.
I mean,
Amazing.
when we thought that we reached the summit, we reached within about 50 meters of the summit. And we came to that ledge and we found that the summit had overhung above us. And it was impossible. We didn't have that kind of gear and we didn't have that kind of time, or I didn't think we had the ability to do that kind of a climb also.
Right.
So we actually rappelled down the other side of the mountain. And we traversed the entire mountain from behind and we climbed it from the opposite direction.
So you found a
So we-
doable.
Yeah, we found a doable size. I mean, we didn't give up thinking, now this is there. We actually rappelled down the other side of the mountain, did a traverse, climbed up from the other side. So it was very fascinating. That whole experience was
Doing everything on your own.
doing everything on our own. Yes, absolutely.
So once you are back down from Kagbhushan, and this was much smaller peak, but you had done in a style that you wanted to do. So how was your journey? What happened? What next? What kind of journey you took on? I remember, you had mentioned about going on an expedition with Sir Chris Bonington. So what was that expedition about? When did that?
So after Kagbhushan, we did one more expedition. Again, the same small group of friends. We went to Munsiari region. We did some. We did 2 peaks, Nandakani, Nandbanar. This was based on my reading of an earlier British climber's experience. And he had just written one paragraph and he said that the approach of Nandakot from the south looks very interesting.
Okay.
So when he said it looks interesting, it sort of was a cue for me. It in his article, basically Martin Moran, you might have heard of.
I know Martin Moran. Yeah.
So Martin Moran had been, and he had just mentioned it. So at that point of time, I dived into maps for the first time and sort of really got into it. And I learned what I'd learned in school on map reading, converting contours into a slope. This was something we did as 10th standard students, So I said, let me see if I'll do it for this mountain.
Okay.
And I was amazed that this mountain looked extremely steep visually.
Okay.
But when I converted it and the slopes, it was showing an average slope of about 40 degrees, kind of.
Which is not
so
bad.
I said to myself, this is showing 40 degrees. Am I going wrong somewhere?
Right.
So I mean, I was still very young and I had hardly 2-3 expeditions to my experience. So at that time, there was a very senior mountaineer, Arun Samant.
Okay.
So I contacted him. I said, Arun, I want to discuss this with you. And I sat with him. And he said, you want to do Nandakot South Face? You're crazy. So I said, why? He's saying, have you seen how steep it is? I said, yeah, but I'll show you this. This looks possible to me.
Right.
And then I had a long discussion. And he says, what you're saying is theoretical, but you don't know what the mountain will throw at you.
Correct.
So I said, yeah, but the best way to find out is to go there.
Right.
And so we actually went on that expedition. I established summit camp for Nandakot.
Okay.
And unfortunately, a huge storm came in at that point of time. It piled up about 4 to 5 feet of snow overnight. And we sort of had to run away from that summit camp next day.
But did your contours did turn out?
Yeah, I'll tell you. We sort of escaped by the whiskers of our teeth from. We sort of set off an avalanche below our feet because of that huge snow accumulation. We went down to base camp, and then because I had to retrieve all the gear we had left up after the weather settled, we went up and we quickly did 2 summits of the adjoining peaks, Nandakani and Nandbanar.
Okay.
And then we couldn't attempt the main peak. But incidentally, Martin Moran went and climbed the peak I think you are
Nandakot.
Nandakot. I mean, that route was climbed twice, once by him and once by a team from Calcutta. They went up, maybe based on what experience we had. But the route was doable. Is doable, rather. It's still
Is doable.
is still doable.
Superb.
So that was it. And then after that expedition, I was very fortunate. I got invited to a joint expedition, Indian-British team in '94 to Kinnaur. So Harish Kapadia was the leader, and the British side, Sir Chris Bonington was the leader. So that was a really good opportunity for me to, really get into mountaineering and learn from so many great climbers, explorers. And it was fascinating for me because when we were initially doing research on the mountain, it was just a dot on the map with a map height even.
So if sorry to interrupt you, but which mountain were you planning to climb in that expedition?
So it was later on named by us as Rangri Krang.
Okay.
But at that point of time, it was only a dot on the mountain very close to the Indo-Tibet borders.
Okay.
That is all the information, and it was in Kinnaur region. We knew we had to go to Rekong Pio, Kalpa, that place. Little ahead there's Chitkul village, and from there we had to get into the mountains.
Right.
So what was fascinating for me was, of course, I was overawed by the fact that I'll be going with Sir Chris Bonington. And I was literally half his age. We did his Sashti Purti pujas. He completed 60 years that time.
Wow.
And we sort of did a puja in Mumbai, and we all left from here. But I was wanting to learn the whole process. What happens? How do these guys plan? And Sir Chris Bonington, I mean, he was my idol, I mean, he is my idol. I mean, today also at 91, he's a...
But think
active.
Think of all the Everest climbers today. If you ask them who is Sir Chris Bonington, I can guarantee you that 90% haven't heard that name. So
Yeah.
it's how terrible this whole community is that doesn't know about the legends of this whole sport.
I mean, I had read his book Everest the Hard Way, page to page, and try to understand the thought process and how does he plan the expedition and all. And I mean, he's a great person. He's absolutely an amazing person. So Rangri Krang expedition, he was also going to be there leading the British part of the team. And I said, wow, this is going to be amazing. And then while the planning process was going on, I was trying to see how does one go about it.
Right.
And I got a call from Harish Kapadia. We used to chat along, how things are and all.
Right.
He said that, hey, Divesh, you're going to have a problem. I said, what is it? He's saying, I couldn't find any pictures of the mountain. So I said, yeah, so he's saying, yeah, but I mean, we are going on such a major expedition and we don't have any idea what the mountain looks like also.
Right.
So I said, okay, now what do we do? So then we finally decided, let's write to Chris Bonington and let's take his opinion as to what he feels about it.
Right.
So Harish contacted him and he replied immediately saying, all the better. I said, wow, that is something. But I remember the sight when we were walking towards Rangri, the peak. You couldn't see it even during the approach much. And at one point of time, while I was walking, and I could hear around the bend, there was a big commotion going on, I was wondering what's happening. People are shouting and what's really happening. And I turned the bend and Sir Chris Bonington was like a little child with a new toy. I'm telling you, that was it. He was overjoyed. He was jumping over there with joy, having seen the mountain for the first time. I said, wow, here is a person who, after 40 odd years, maybe more of climbing and having climbed the world's toughest mountains, been to some of the remotest spots on earth, he could still have that enthusiasm and excitement of seeing a new peak and trying to do something new. And I said, really, this is the secret of what is keeping him ticking at that age? You know, I mean, full of energy, full of enthusiasm. That was a learning for me. At that point of time.
I had goosebumps, when you said the commotion and Chris Pointer. I'm like, this is what is going to do.
Yeah, so he was so excited about the whole thing that enthusiasm was like new, was fresh. So we went. Again, it was amazing. We opened the route on our own.
So again, how was the expedition? Like again, Sherpa guided or?
So we didn't have any Sherpas. We had one or two Haps with us. The idea was, it started off with the Britishers climbing their own style and mountain, whatever they want. We Indians were supposed to do our own.
Okay.
But when we did the recce of the mountain together.
Okay.
And we found that there is no other route possible. There was only one route possible.
Okay.
So then there was a lot of discussion and all. And it was finally decided that both the teams would join up together and climb the mountain.
Okay.
And we share responsibilities also.
Okay.
So we shared responsibility. We were together in route opening. No doubt they were far more experienced and really great climbers who were there. So for me, it was purely learning and supporting them and understanding from them how this goes on.
Right.
But it felt good to be out in the front with them.
Right. Right.
So, whatever route fixing we had to do, because it was a very difficult and very risky route that was selected.
Okay.
So we went, we did everything on our own. We had Haps who also accompanied us, but they accompanied us like team members. I mean, it was
not like...
No, and ultimately what happened is we were 8 or 10 of us on the mountain. It was decided that we climb in twos.
Okay.
And then after being on a summit camp, we reached the summit camp, which was a thin ridge. We had to hack a platform off the summit ridge. And I remember very clearly my tent, two ends of it were in the air. And I was wondering, I don't want to really roll at night on either side. So we went, and because, so in the morning, Chris Bonington said that no, if we try and climb in twos, we'll waste too much time. So let's do it all as a team.
Okay.
So one team started fixing the route ahead.
Okay.
And we would follow, and the last person would take off the rope and go ahead.
Okay.
So it was like a rolling kind of a system. We climbed the mountain in that manner. All of us reached the summit together. It was a great experience. Coming back also, we did the same thing. We sort of took turns in removing the rope from behind.
Right.
And then after Rangrik Rang was climbed, we had a second part of the expedition when we went to climb Manirang.
Okay.
In Spiti.
And Manirang was already climbed before?
Manirang was climbed many years ago by a British team.
Okay.
So, and then it was climbed once by an Indian paramilitary force.
Okay.
So, when we went on the mountain, again, it was purely members and who went up. And I remember we made one attempt, but unfortunately we could not succeed. And that at the summit camp, we had the discussion, now what do? We failed.
Right.
So at that time, Paul Nunn was on the British team with us. And Paul Nunn was president of British Mountaineering Council at one, I think just before that. So everybody had decided that no, we'll go down.
Okay.
Then he asked me, Devesh, do you think you want to make a second attempt?
Right.
Again, I said, yes.
Yes, why not?
Why? So then the next day, just two of us, we climbed the mountain. It was fantastic because we were short of time. It was the last day for us on the mountain.
Right.
It was do or go down.
Right.
That's it. And I remember in the morning when we opened the zip of the tent, we could see lightning strike in the horizon,
Wow.
Streaks of lightning coming.
So like a storm coming.
Yeah. So Paul told me, we can't do this. But when you're young, you don't want to give up so easily. So we made a deal. I made a deal with him. I told him, Paul, I will not argue with you. You tell me when to go down.
Okay.
And I will not. But that seemed very far away. So let's climb till whatever point we can.
Right.
So he said, okay, done. No arguments. When I tell you we go down, you go down.
Right.
I said, absolutely fine. So we started climbing and we actually soloed up most of the mountain because we had
no ropes. You were just
no, we were just carrying one rope
okay.
and we soloed up the whole mountain. The last couple of pitches, I led up one pitch and he led up the final
Fine.
pitch. That thing. Because it was purely, we were well acclimatized, we were technically able to handle that situation. I was really happy that he had the confidence in me also. And that was another fantastic experience to climb with Paul Nunn. And he's written a very beautiful article on that climb.
Wow.
Manirang.
So doing basically entire thing on your own, being solo on the mountain, every decision, like even one miss, you would die. This is not like I'm on a Jumar on a fixed rope where if something goes wrong, there's,
No.
I'm just going to be
No, in fact, we were so short of time that we decided to solo it up because we felt it was not a risky decision. We first looked at the snow conditions, we looked at the slope, and we felt, yes, we could handle it. The test came while coming down because while going up, it was nice, crisp conditions.
It's night
While
and perhaps
coming down, it was afternoon and the snow had got slush and there was hard ice below. So we couldn't solo down that. Down climbing, that would have been risky.
Right.
So then we decided to use the ice screws we had and then rappel off pitch by pitch, coming down. So, I mean, it was proper thought out decision, nothing rash in it.
But also not someone else taking the decision for you.
No, we were doing it ourselves.
Right? It's not like if I'm on an Everest climb, I'm, looking at, oh, this slope doesn't look good, I'm going to, go on my own. None of this, right? You are in charge of your own decisions and the consequences.
Yes, absolutely.
From those, decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
So that was Manirang. Yeah.
So after that, so you were, mentioning about exploration and how you got like so many inspirations like Sir Chris Bonington or, so of course I have been in the Everest world and my journey has, been on a different trajectory compared to, what you have done in the last 40 years, which is, by the way, groundbreaking, path breaking in so many ways. Whereas, people give us Everest climbers, so much credit, which is, I don't think we deserve it. But that said, I have also been on my journey in this world, or I would like to go on my journey in this world. And similar to, how you would, try to figure out, okay, this is where I want to explore. This is where I want to explore. After doing all these climbs in Ladakh has, been a special place for me. And for you, we'll get into that. For you, it has been like crazy.
Second home for
you.
Yeah.
So I reached out to my guide and I asked him that, hey, look, I really want to do something which is more exploration oriented or which is where someone has never gone before or very few people have gone before. And he said, that this area has suddenly opened up and why don't you, come and climb in this area? This local, guide I have who runs this horticulture farm or something in that area has sent me photos of this mountain. And so the photo he sent me was of Yaksi Pombo, but telling me that this is Luxi Pombo. Because the local guide himself was confused whether which is Luxi Pombo, which is Yaksi Pombo. He has no clue. So he says that this is Luxi Pombo. So I looked up Luxi Pombo on, of course, online. I'm like, is there anything like this? And of course, I see your, Himalayan club, entry. And I'm like, okay, this is climb. This is, climbable, which means, and for me, it was a huge inspiration, that report, reading the whole report and saying that I am going to go and, attempt or try and, climb this mountain, go in this range, do all of this. But of course, I had footsteps to follow. In your case, you were literally perhaps the first person going in that range and climbing in that range. So I wanted to get a sense, how do you figure out, okay, what is my next expedition going to be? How do you figure out, like, let's say if I'm a newbie and I want to go embark on the path of exploration. how would I start, right? Like most people, if I tell them go and explore, they would really be like, okay, मैं तो Google पे जाके search करूँगा. But some of these regions, like for example, some of the Eastern Karakoram exploration you have done may not have anything, in Google Earth or, in Google except your reports. So if I want to go into a completely new area, what is your thought process around planning this?
So, so it's very interesting how how we ended up in the Angtung Valley for these mountains. So earlier to that, years ago, we had already been going in the Karakoram range and the Nubra Valley,
Right.
and in couple of occasions from very high vantage points on the mountains in Nubra.
Okay.
Along, if you see towards the turning point of the Shoyak takes a sharp U-turn.
Correct.
So when we would look towards that turn, we would see these beautiful peaks in the horizon.
Okay.
And it was always fascinating. What are these peaks,
Right.
And we were debating, sometime we should go and look at this mountains,
Right.
And then we said, let's get down to searching. Where is this? What is this? And then we got an approximate idea. Those days, it was even Google Earth was not all that.
Right. But it was
good.
almost
Yeah,
starting to come.
Yeah. So on that, we searched, and then we found that, there is this valley, Angtung, and the approach is from the Somoriri Lake. Pangong Lake. And we could go. So we applied for permission, and incidentally, we had Americans with us. So we applied for that. This was in the year 2010, 10 or 11, and we applied. But unfortunately, what happened was that the process of getting approval took so long that the Ministry of Home Affairs and the Defense Ministry gave us clearance the day our friends were to land in India.
Okay.
And then, there is a process of getting visas, mountaineering visas,
Right.
and all. So they couldn't go through that process.
Right.
So that year, although we had permits, we could not then finally go and climb in that area. We went somewhere else.
Right.
So, but we kept on. The next year, again, I applied. That year, we were refused without any. They never tell you why, but
Why?
they refused.
Right.
Then again, we applied in the next year. And that year, we got through.
Okay.
So I think 2012 we went.
But so what does this mean? You apply to IMF, you apply.
So you mountaineering in India is sort of governed through the Indian Mountaineering Foundation. It is the apex body for mountaineering in India. So all your applications have to go through the Indian Mountaineering Foundation, and then if you are going to a sensitive area in the inner line, then they will forward it to the Ministry of Defense.
So you don't have to do that all by yourself.
No, you have to go through the Indian Mountaineering Foundation.
Okay.
So we went through, and we finally got permission in 2012. And then again, we did more research. What is the approach? And we sort of went in blind into that valley.
Okay.
Thinking that we are climbing those peaks which are seen from Nubra.
Right.
And it was fascinating because as we went into the valley, we were very fascinated to meet this old man at the village just at the beginning of the valley.
Phobrang.
I forget the name. There's a village just at the base of the.
It's Phobrang and then
Phobrang.
inside the valley.
Yeah. So we went, and I always like to go and meet the local people, ask them whether they know anything about the valley.
Right.
Because we didn't know, we could not find any other person who had ever visited the valley. So how do we gather information? So this is the second best possibility.
Right.
And he was a shepherd in his younger days. He was now too old to walk around also.
Right.
But he was part of the Indian Army. In 62 war, he had been taken prisoner of war and taken into China. And so it was really nice to sit through the evening listening to his stories. How was his experience and all. And then we gave him a surprise. We had Google Earth images And we asked him, okay, can you
Tell
tell us what is this mountain and all? So he got a shock. He said, how can you have these pictures which you have not been over there? Then we explained to him that now technology is
Changed.
different and this is how the whole process was. But he could tell us what kind of terrain to expect for the approach.
Right.
So then we went into the valley. We had muleteers who dropped us at some point of time.
Right.
Then it was our own exploration, and we went into each of the thing to physically look at possible routes to climb, and that's what the approach was.
Approach was wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So I mean, but how any specific stories you remember from that expedition? I remember reading a report, and I think it was once you had climbed Luxi Pombo. And then I think you had mentioned something around going into trying to climb a mountain where there was rockfall and serious danger of rockfall.
Yes.
So I always wondered, and I wanted to ask you, which was that area where that rockfall was happening?
No, so we shifted our camp after climbing the first peak. We shifted our camp because we wanted to climb a peak which we could see from the summit of our first climb.
Right.
And then we went into that valley, and there were two peaks adjoining each other. And then we were observing both the mountains. And this mountain which you talked about, it had a lot of rockfall happening. So we said, okay, that's out of question.
Okay.
Because there was no other route which was safe. There was a continuous barrage of stones coming down.
Okay.
That's how we went and climbed the other mountain.
Okay. So any stories you remember from the expedition, like any?
No. So there, I was fascinated because Ladakh, everybody has this impression about it being a dry area and, it's barren and all
Right.
that. But when we got into the Angtung Valley, it was a totally different picture. You see greenery
Everywhere.
everywhere. I mean, you see kilometers and kilometers of greenery, and you see thousands of water bodies,
Right.
which was absolutely fascinating.
Right.
And we found pristine areas to camp. We had these little, what do you call them? Mice.
Pika.
Pika. So these pika are like little mice.
Right.
And initially I saw them running around the campsite. I said, my God, we're going to have a problem with our food. But they did touch our food at all.
They don't.
And we were camped over there, and these pikas running around, and they were very inquisitive little creatures, and they would come and peek at you. So it was really in connect with nature. That experience of being there, pristine, undisturbed, clean environment, no garbage around. And I mean, we don't leave even a small piece of plastic there. Once we get out of that place,
You completely wrap up.
completely, you will not find anything.
We went to the campsite. We didn't find anything.
You won't find, because
We didn't even find anything on
Yeah.
the summit that both you guys did Petzi Kangri, and even we went to Petzi Kangri. We didn't even find a bolt anywhere. Nothing. Not a piece of rope left.
So
Nothing on the
we really believe that we should only take back memories and leave back footprints.
even the footprints were not there. So
Yeah. So we sort of, but it was also a very good climb that we had, and we could gaze into Nubra Valley from the summit of that. All that, and we could start identifying the peaks that we had climbed in the earlier years.
wow.
But every time we stand on a summit, it opens up 10 more possibilities of other peaks to climb.
That's how you find your.
That's how we find the next peak to climb. So many of the peaks that we have, many of the areas we have explored, it has purely been because that we had seen this peak from so and so place and it looked fascinating. Let's research on it. So that is one way we look for the peak.
Okay.
And the other way we look for the peak is of course Google Earth now.
Right.
I mean, I spend hours and hours looking that, okay, I've been on this valley. What's adjoining? What is left undone? I do a lot of reading, also past reports, other expeditions. Fortunately, Eastern Karakoram, there are hardly any exploratory or hardly any expeditions that have gone compared to the rest of the Himalayan ranges.
Right.
So what are the mountains what are the areas that are still not touched.
Not touched. So So your forte has been more on the, like all your explorations have been more on the Eastern Karakoram side. So I've
Yes.
been reading so many reports and most of them are on the Eastern Karakoram side. So I wanted to know, how did you got fascinated by Eastern Karakoram, and how did you start exploring the region? Because honestly, like I have been to Ladakh like now 14-15 times, but I have never even thought of going to Eastern Karakoram. And of course, more the pop, I have been more in the popular side of things, like a Kangyatse 1 or like Chamsher Kangri or Mentok Kangri, Stoke Kangri, some of these things. But Eastern Karakoram, even if you search online, you are not going to find anything. Okay, what peaks are there? What to climb there? How to go there? And even some of the reports I've read from your side of Eastern Karakoram, some of this stuff is incredibly difficult. Like the glacier crossings, or the whole crossing from top to bottom, or connecting these different systems looks extremely complicated and extremely difficult, and hardly there's any information except your trip reports, of course, but they are there now. When you were going, I'm assuming there were no trip reports. So how did this all start?
So for me, Eastern Karakoram started with a trip to Siachen Glacier.
Okay.
So in '98, Harish Kapadia led a team to go on the actual glacier, and I was fortunate to be with that team. And that is the time I saw the mountains of Eastern Karakoram, and that's the time I fell in love with the mountains over there. We actually trekked up the glacier. My wife Vinita, along with Harish.
When you say trekked up the glacier, what do you mean? Which glacier?
The Siachen Glacier. The actual Siachen Glacier is 72-kilometer glacier.
And you trekked the whole.
So no, not all of us. My climbing partner Cyrus Shroff and myself, we went about halfway up the glacier to a certain point, and then we concentrated on climbing a peak.
Okay.
So we climbed a peak and then we came back. The rest of the team, Harish Kapadia, my wife Vinita, Kaivan Mistry, Vijay Kothari, they continued along the glacier and they went to the northernmost point, Indira Col.
This is a tri-junction of India, Pakistan and China.
It would be, the topmost. And then they came back along the glacier down that things. But it's sort of, I could see the mountains of Eastern Karakoram and it was fascinating. One correction I'd like to make is that there have been so many expeditions to Eastern Karakoram, but this was prior to 1984 when the war broke on the glacier itself. So there have been a lot of explorations done by the earlier British explorers also. A lot of teams had been on Eastern Karakoram, but mostly on the northern glaciers of Eastern Karakoram.
Okay.
And that was in '98. We went into Siachen. And then in 2001, I was again fortunate to go for a joint expedition, Indian, British, American team, where we went into Arganglas Valley. So there, it was the first time any mountaineering team was going into the Arganglas Valley in the Eastern Karakoram.
This is much south though.
Much south. This is much south. So south of Saserla. But Harish Kapadia, as he is, he's an amazing, he's a scholar, absolute. He had done so much of research and found that this is a nice valley to visit. There are a lot of mountains. Some of the highest peaks in that particular valley is what we thought that we'll attempt. And again, Sir Chris Bonington was there, Mark Ritchie was there, Mark Wilford were there. So I was amazed to see what type of climbing they were doing. They were doing in alpine style. They climbed a peak called Yamandaka, which is just fantastic. I mean, I have no words to explain the kind of climb they did, but there's a lot written about those climbs of theirs. And then there was no looking back for me. So in 2005, a good friend of ours, Don Goodman, and myself, we decided let's do a joint expedition, the American team and an Indian team. So we got together 7 Indians and 7 Americans. And then from the Arganglas Valley, we had seen some peaks, in the adjoining. So we said, let's do that. And we have been very fortunate to be supported by a very good friend of ours who's a Ladakhi, Motup. So Motup Chewang is a Ladakhi. His wife, Yangdu, is a Sherpani.
Okay.
And they run a company called Remo Expeditions. And they have been supporting our team expeditions always.
Okay.
An amazing support that they give. And also he helps us gather information, what it is, how it is. So then he supported that expedition. And then in virtually every year, we have been going to the Eastern Karakoram. And then we sort of systematically sought out the valleys of Eastern Karakoram which had not been visited earlier.
So, like when you say they have not been visited, like Eastern Karakoram, I would think is bordering Tibet. So, Aksai Chin, I would think that's.
So, you could say the broad demarcation of the Karakoram mountains is where the Himalayas end, that is Ladakh. And then you go northwest is the whole Eastern Karakoram belt.
Right.
This east and west concept is laid down because of the division between POK and India.
Right.
So, the Saltoro Ridge is the dividing line.
Right.
So, if you go west, northwest of that is Western Karakoram, and the rest of it is called Eastern
Karakoram.
Karakoram. So, to one side you have POK, and to the other side you have Aksai Chin.
Aksai Chin.
That's how the sort of division is lying.
So even Aksai Chin is a sensitive area. So wouldn't the army be going and doing short patrols or long form patrols or anything?
Of course they would be doing.
Okay, so wouldn't they be climbing peaks in some of these regions?
Climbing peaks, no, they are mostly patrolling the area.
Okay.
But they have done some expedition in the past. Unfortunately, the army is not very open to sharing the expeditions. So
but I'm more sensitive. So
they would have gone and climbed some peaks we don't know about also.
Okay, understood.
So it will be there in their records. It is not shared with the Himalayan Club or with IMF. There are no reports on those climbs.
Of those climbs.
So that's the way. And so we have been systematically going from one valley to the other and looking at peaks in the area. And from that joint expedition with Don Goodman in 2005, we climbed 5 peaks, 5 first ascents we made.
In a single expedition?
On that expedition. But what was more enjoyable and fascinating was that after having climbed those 5 peaks, in the evening, Don and myself, we were discussing, okay, now what should we do? Should we wind up? So he's an amazing guy, always enthusiastic. He's saying, no, we have a couple of days more. So I said, yeah, what do you want to do? So he's saying, Devesh, I have observed something very interesting.
Okay.
And we could possibly find a route connecting this valley, the valley we were is the Sati Valley, and connect it to an adjoining Rongdo Valley. So he's saying from where we were climbing, I observed that there was a possibility of doing this connection.
Like over a pass or something.
Yeah. So I said, okay, Don, so how do we go about doing it? So then we decided the whole strategy, how we will have an advanced team going, exploring, and then we'll send a message down. If they find a route, then the rest of the team would go up.
So these are an extra 2 days you are going to do.
Yeah. So he said, I said, yeah, okay, we are in for it. So the rest of the logistics means our liaison officer, along with the Sherpas, they wound up the expedition and went out by the route we came. But the team members, we lugged our own loads from there, and we did a crossing of a high pass.
All on your own.
All on your own. Yeah.
Kind style.
And we crossed into the Rongdo Valley. And it was very amusing. When we got into the Rongdo Valley, it's a nice, lush, green valley with beautiful river flowing through it. We crossed the river, and we saw there was a shepherd's hut. Nobody was seen in the hut. And then we went down all the way. We came to the Rongdo village, and there was panic in the village because they thought, where the hell did these guys come from? We didn't see them go up. I mean, They were wondering whether we came from China or we came from Pakistan. So they were hiding in the initial time. They were hiding.
Also, they saw you guys.
They saw us coming down and they were scared that where we didn't see them go up. So where did they come from? And they only saw high mountains ahead.
Right.
So they were sort of hiding. And then when they heard us speak amongst ourselves in Hindi, they realized that nahi, ye to Indians hai.
Indians.
So then they came out of their houses, and then they talked to us and saying, how did you come here? And we can't believe that you came from here and all. Then we explained to them that, okay, this is the place. And if you see up this valley, this is the route which we found and we came. And they were delighted that somebody could find, they thought that was a dead end,
Right.
Nobody could ever come down from there.
Wow.
So then year after year, we went from one valley to the other. And then one year, we also decided, okay, the Shoyak takes this U-turn, and where it sort of takes a bend, we'll consider that as the southernmost point of the Eastern Karakoram.
Right.
Because beyond that is the Ladakh range and all that.
Correct.
So what sparked, the idea that came to mind is, why not try and find a route from the southernmost point and go to the northernmost point.
Wow.
So we sat down and we researched and yes, we said, yes, it's possible. We can connect all the valleys because all the valleys are otherwise running parallel to each other and we would have to cross several passes. And that's the challenge, to find routes crossing these ridge lines.
So how? Like on Google Earth? So what was the approach?
We did Google Earth. We went through maps, old maps of the area, and of course there were no prior expedition reports of that place.
Right.
So it was purely on the basis of these maps and Google Earth. And so then in 2016 we did the Karakoram Traverse expedition, where we started off from the southernmost, from Rongdo village. That was the last village that we could find a thing. And then we did, on that expedition, we could finally cover about 100 kilometers of distance. And we did crossing of 3 high passes which had never been crossed before. But we had to stop at some point of time because that expedition, that year, we were bogged down with a lot of other difficulties. That was the year when when GST started. So like we sort of 1 year, so sometime we could not leave Mumbai also because we had to organize ourselves in Mumbai.
Right.
One of our climbers has a business, and me being a chartered accountant and also
busy.
So we started late, we went there, and then unfortunately I had an accident.
What happened?
So in the initial part of it, when we went into the Rongdo Valley and we were going up to a high pass, towards a high pass, early morning while crossing a stream, I didn't realize that there was verglass on the floor.
Okay. What is that? Can you?
Verglass means it's a thin, because it was early in the morning, the temperatures are very low. So as the water is flowing over the rocks, it freezes.
Right.
And it forms a layer of ice on the rock.
On the rock.
And it's a very thin layer. You can't see it.
Right.
So subconscious, I was just chatting with somebody. I didn't realize, and the stream was just like a 1 foot, like thin stream going around. I thought, we were crossing over, but I slipped because of the verglass. And I hit my head against a rock. So I was knocked unconscious at that point of time. And there was a lot of internal bleeding that took place. It formed like a big bump on my forehead.
So,
and one eye was closed totally because of the blood having come down. So when I gained conscience, they sort of helped me up and brought me to the camp. And I realized that actually I was not, I was feeling normal. It's just that one eye was not I couldn't open the eye, and it had started turning black and blue, and the blood had sort of accumulated down, and it was putting a lot of pressure. So
Why not go home? Like,
No, so
what's the thought process?
So I said no. I think we can take a couple of days rest and go on. And my team members said nothing. You are nuts. And they said that you are stripped of your leadership just now. You are not in a position to take decisions.
Okay.
So we'll take the decision for you. So they, so Vinita came down with me to Leh along with another team member and two of the support staff. And we went, we got an X-ray done. We met the doctor over there. And then he said, luckily there is no internal damage. It is externally the
Just leading visual.
yeah, it's like getting a very hard knockout.
It's a punch from the mouth.
Punch. So, but then it took a week, and then of course he said, anyway, even if I tell you, you're not going to listen to me. So you go, you do what you want, just be careful. So we went back up, but we lost a lot of time in all this.
But then, was the team continuing, or the team had also?
No, team was waiting for me at base camp.
Okay.
At one point on the glacier.
Okay.
So we went there, back again reorganized ourselves. We could do this 100 kilometers of traverse, and then we said we'll come back and do the next part of the traverse later on. Yeah.
So did you do that later?
No. So the next part of it requires us to go ask permission because it is in the inner line and very close to the border and all. And somehow we've not been able to get that permission. But we have been doing small sections of it. Wherever we get permission, we go and do it.
Okay.
So it's nice. But the idea is that ultimately I do want to connect all the dots to see a route all the way going across the Eastern Karakoram. Yeah.
Wow. Amazing. Wish you the very best.
Yeah.
And
thank you.
hopefully once you publish the report, we can just follow and, maybe do a second,
Yeah.
like traverse of that. But going to, so when I was reading your trip reports, one expedition also that stood out was Chamshen.
Yeah.
I think being a 7,000 or I think a lot of the expeditions after Kamet and Bhrigupant, that you did earlier in your kind of career, a lot of the expeditions later on became like more like 6,000ers. And I think you did try Plateau Peak, which was, I think, a 7,000er.
Yeah.
But like, I think Chamshen was also at its point one of the more taller, unclimbed, peaks in that region. So how was that expedition? And
so we my story with 7,000 doesn't. Kamet was my first 7,000 meter peak, and then I was never bothered about the height of the peak. Somebody very humorously said that you don't marry a woman for her height. So you don't climb a mountain just for its height. You can find it. So we Don Goodman and myself, after our first expedition, he came up with this idea. He said, let's identify mountains of 7,000 meters that have not been climbed.
Okay.
So we sort of dug into the history and saw which are the mountains, how many mountains are there of 7,000 meters which are not climbed. And we found that there were very few. And most of these very few were in the Siachen Glacier area. So the Apsaras and all that, which we would not be able to do. There is one peak, Saltoro Kangri, which is the highest unclimbed peak in the world today, which you can't attempt because one side of it is POK and one side of it is India. You don't want to be shot climbing. So while doing this research, we found this peak Chongkumdan, which was not climbed, Chongkumdan 2. So in 2007, we went to climb that peak. But unfortunately, when we were on the glacier, we saw the effect of global warming way back in 2007. The glacier was totally shattered, broken. We couldn't reach the base of Chongkumdan 2 also. So then when we couldn't reach, I was thoroughly disappointed. I said, we had really struggled all the way to go to base camp, crossed so many glaciers with horses and all that to get kilometers into the valley. And then Don came up to me and he said, don't be so disheartened. Let's try another mountain. He said, yes, why not? So he pointed out to a mountain which he had, while coming down the glacier, he spotted a mountain, the Chongkumdan 1. he said, "See, there is a possibility. Let's attempt this. We've got all the gear, we've got all the stuff." So
Right.
that year we went and actually climbed Chongkumdan 1, which is also 7,000 meters.
7,000. Okay, wow.
And I was amazed to find out all this later on that a British team with Harish Kapadia had gone there. And two of the top climbers, British climbers, had seen that route and said, "Nothing doing. We can't look at this route."
And you guys went there.
But they climbed the mountain, but they climbed it. They went circumnavigated and they climbed it from another route.
Another route.
And in here, we had no other choice. So we said, okay, let's do it.
From here.
And we found a good route and we could climb that. So that was a 7,000 meter peak. And then this sort of a craze got into it, to what about the other 7,000 meter peaks? That's how we identified Chamshen
Chamshen. Okay.
as still one. It is part of the Saser Kangri group of peaks. And it was the only 7,000 meter peak that had not been climbed in that group, in that whole group. And it was fascinating for me because to find the approach to the base itself was a task.
You mean the base camp or
To reach the mountain itself.
Wow.
To reach the mountain itself was a problem because its eastern approaches comes from the Shoyok Valley. And at that point of time, there was no road to reach there. So it was a long trek to even start the approach march of that mountain. The only team that had been from there was an Indian Army team which climbed Saser Kangri 1 from that side. And they had taken more than a month just to reach the start of the trek. They had a 3-month expedition to reach base camp of the mountain
Almost
and climb.
Feels like Annapurna in 90.
Yeah, exactly. So it was a long and it was 40-member team with huge load ferrying taking place and all that. They had started walking from Shoyok for days and days and days. They had walked and reached. So I said, that's not possible.
Yeah.
I saw the western approaches. So then I remembered I'd been on an attempt of Plateau Peak and we had gone to a high call, which we had called as the Sakang call. And from there I could see that glacier and those mountain regions. So I said, now that's the only possible way. One is
So cross Sakang call and
cross that high call, Sakang call, and go down and then reach the base directly of the mountain. So it was in my mind that whether this is feasible. And it was going on. So incidentally, we teamed up with a British climber, Victor Saunders, Suzanne Jensen, and Andy Parkin, 3 of the really, really good climbers. And Vinita and myself were the part of the Indian team. So 5 of us, and we had our support team. And we said we were supposed to attempt Plateau Peak. When we reached the base of Plateau Peak, at that point of time, we found there was a 30-member team from the Ladakh Scouts who was attempting Plateau Peak. Now, we did not know they were there and they did not know we were coming because they don't need to go through IMF.
Correct.
So they simply said, we are going to climb the peak. And IMF didn't know that they were there. So they gave us permission to go. We met up at base camp and I said, no, we can't be climbing the mountain with 30 people of them and plus us together.
Yeah.
And there are not many routes on Plateau Peak feasible.
Right.
So there we took a decision on the spot that let's attempt Chamshen by crossing over from the Sakang.
But you had the permit for Chamshen.
We didn't have the permit.
Okay.
But we had a LO and we told him that
correct.
We can't go back now. Now that we can't attempt Plateau Peak.
Right.
So there is a provision in the regulation that if you want, you can attempt something else. You have to pay extra if at all.
Right.
Now here we couldn't climb the mountain for which we had a permit. So we switched the objective. And then we went and explored that Sakang col or ridge rather, that whole ridge line. And after several attempts, we found a feasible route to go down the other side. We went down more than 500 meters down the other side with a whole team of Sherpas helping us to bring the loads down. Because it was a one-time affair. You can't keep on doing load ferries across this kind of terrain.
Correct.
So the 3 Britishers, 2 members, and then we had a group of Sherpas with us. We all ferried the load down that slope, 1600 odd feet, to reach the bottom of the glacier. And then we went, and from there, it took us 2 days to reach the base of Chamshen.
Wow.
And then we had decided the Britishers wanted to climb on their own. You
were going to climb
on our own. So we had taken a different approach to the mountain. They were wanting to take a different approach. And after doing, all the recceing and everything, we had decided on the routes. But unfortunately, the weather turned very badly. And there was a huge storm, lot of snowfall. The Britishers were running out of food because they only carried that much. We were going by that traditional style of mountaineering, so we had got hordes of food also.
Right.
So we could last out for longer days.
Right.
So then they said, no, we'll go back and maybe we'll climb something else or we'll come back here, whatever. We said, fine.
And going back would be
back up that there's no other exit.
My God.
There was no other exit.
Just like you were in like a prison or something.
Yeah. There was no other exit. So they said, it's fine, we can manage. And I was not very comfortable because of the weather.
Okay.
But it was their decision to take. So they went, and then that night, unfortunately, they got hit by avalanche. In the sense, it was not even directly a hit by avalanche. The avalanche came down the side of Saser Kangri 2, and the wave of wind that it brought in,
right,
that
aftershock,
the aftershock hit them and threw their tents
Airborne.
nearly 40-50 feet in the air. And when they landed, unfortunately, Andy Parkin landed inside a crevasse. He landed sort of and went straight into the crevasse.
So the whole tent and him inside the crevasse.
So he was wrapped up in his tent and he went into the crevasse. And Victor and Suzanne were in the other tent. They also got thrown out, but luckily they didn't get injured.
Okay.
But unfortunately, Andy got severely injured. He had a fracture of the sacral bone. That's basically the lower back.
Yeah.
And for them, it is miraculous that he survived because he was jammed into the crevasse. Luckily for him, he had one of the world's topmost climbers or the guides and, such a nice person to him. Victor Saunders. So Victor and Suzanne, they brought him out. Then he had to actually crawl away from there for 2 kilometers.
How? With a broken back?
Yeah, but he's an amazing person.
Crazy. Oh my God. Can't even imagine.
He crawled 2 kilometers away to get away from any other avalanche
that can hit. Yeah.
Because
they were in danger zone.
Yeah,
it could happen again.
So then he stayed at that point. Victor and Suzanne came back to camp. Then we organized a rescue. All the Sherpas and us.
I heard there was a story with the rescue as well.
So we went next day morning. We went to him and we carried him back to our camp. And then we called in the helicopter rescue from the Air Force. So they came and they picked him up. And fortunately, everything went well. After that, we went and then we teamed up together.
So Victor stayed.
Victor and Suzanne stayed back.
Okay.
Because, that guy got a lift from the helicopter. The other, all of us had to walk out. So we said, now that we are here and he's safe, we may as well climb the mountain.
Yeah.
So then in the next 3-4 days, we went and climbed Chamshen. We did it jointly then, the 4 of us with the Sherpas. We climbed the mountain. Then we had to come back over that high col. So we had to climb back up and we were tired of that long climb. And that is the time we realized that face was actually, there was rockfall happening over there. The ropes had got cut.
Wow.
So
on Chamshen.
On that col coming down.
When you were finished the climb and you were coming back.
When we were coming back and it was, I was just praying that all of us come out unhurt from there, because over those days the ropes had been cut in several places. There was still rockfall happening. But, fortunately nothing happened. We got out of there and I said, I'm never going to cross this again. It was so that was Chamshin.
But my God, crossing a high pass, which would just be an expedition of its own, was just your access route to the base camp.
So exploring that pass and crossing over and crossing back, that expedition we reached 6,000 meters plus. That height of that pass is 6,000. It was like climbing 7 peaks of 6,000 meters again and again, again and again. So that
Wow, that is amazing. I can't even believe this.
yeah, but it's but the whole experience will remain with me for lifetime. Means being in that place, being so remote that the only way out is either by helicopter or you got to go through this again.
Wow.
And at the same time, the peace and tranquility. I remember the night we spent on the ridge at the summit camp. Beautiful sunset happening. Kilometers on end, you'd see the mountains ahead of you. And you know that you're the only people around for all that distances. It's an amazing experience. Yeah.
But Divyesh, I have one question. There's this going, saying in the mountaineering world, अगर Everest नहीं किया तो कुछ नहीं किया. So you had a chance, to be on that, pre-Everest expedition on Bhrikupand. And perhaps, go and climb Everest after that. What happened on that Bhrikupand expedition? What changed your mindset around Everest and just the commercial guided climbs that actually most of us are doing today? I have done wide majority of my climbing on commercial climbs. And now, after so many years, I understand that what we do is not serious mountaineering. I openly call it, I am a high altitude tourist. That is who I am. Everything that you have described in the last, 1.5 hour or so, I have not even done 5% of that. And yet, people are only talking about Everest, 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 Everest. And now when I look at Everest and what I did on Everest or what I did on Lhotse or what I did on Manas, well, sure, there was high altitude and, other, stuff involved. But I was on a rope, pulling on a rope. Army of Sherpas supporting me. Every camp I get to, platform, tent ready, my food ready, my hot water ready. Literally being woken up by Sherpas. Heck, some of the times if I'm too tired, the Sherpa is even putting my crampon on for me. Doing everything for me. And I think of what you have been doing right from the time planning. Okay, this is the peak I want to climb. How to go figure out what needs to be done. Putting all that together. Going, getting there, finding the route to base camp. Today I can just get a helicopter and get to the base camp of Everest. Heck, these days it's so bad that people are going to camp 2 of Everest on helicopters. I think it's going to be so bad tomorrow that people are going to take a helicopter and go to the summit, get down, take a picture in their down suit, come back and say, hey, I climbed Everest. No, and who asked any question? So it's
Yeah. So many times people ask my wife Vinita and myself, when are you going to go to Everest? So
when are you going to go to Everest?
So we say that maybe when we are in our late 70s or 80s, early 80s, by then somebody would have put a ropeway up. So may as well go that time. But otherwise, to tell you frankly, I've said this earlier also. If somebody even pays me to go and climb Everest, I would not do that. It's not my it's not the way I would like to go mountaineering. It's not the way I enjoy mountains. I was part of. I mean, there were stars. I mean, my eyes were bright when somebody told me come for Everest.
Right.
And then Bhrikupand, happened. And that is the time that expedition was an eye opener for me. I saw what Everest does to most people. I saw that people were going to attempt Everest because it was something to do first, because it would get them some fame, first civilian expedition
from India.
or from Maharashtra or whatever. That was some kind of a record that they wanted to create. They were already looking at what would happen after they climb the peak. What kind of accolades they'll get and what kind of things would happen and what people would be speaking about them and what kind of publicity and it was totally driven by summit fever. It was driven by the desire for the name and fame. And um, for me, Brigupand, I realized the people who otherwise were having a different personality, that personality had changed because of this obsession to go and climb Everest. And I saw that decisions were being taken more for the achieving of that summit than for sometimes common sense
Or the love of mountains.
or the love of mountains. And what I saw over there was the risk level was too high, because then you forget about uh, or rather you are so concentrated on climbing the peak that you disregard some of the risks or many of the risks that are involved. So for me, I said no, I don't want to do that. I would rather go to the mountains for the love of the mountains, uh, to enjoy a quiet place over there, to be with good friends, rather than it doesn't matter to me whether I climb Everest or no. It would be nice to climb in those days. I felt, yeah, it would be great to climb a mountain. It would be a challenge to myself, but not at the cost of all these things which I had seen. So what I saw in Brigupan was very unfortunate. Uh, the reasons why people were climbing were different. The risks that they took were different. And then it became a whole lot of politics happening. It was all about money. And if you are more concerned about how you're going to raise those lakhs and crores of rupees to fund it, rather than the style of climbing or what kind of a thing. And then ultimately, over the years, I have seen this getting even worse as it goes. So when I go on an expedition, I am able to I am taking the decisions, where to camp, where to go, what will I do today. I may feel like just lying down and sitting next to a nice stream and reading a book. Then I could do that. But if I'm on an Everest expedition, I'm on a sort of a schedule.
You're on a schedule.
Okay, I have no choice.
Right.
Okay, if I cannot choose where I want to camp, also
You
it's
can't.
being decided.
Nothing. Yeah.
I cannot choose. No, I have no say in where the rope is going to be laid down. What is the route on the mountain to be climbed? What day? What is going to be happen? So in that sense, I agree to that terminology of tourism. What you say? It's like going on a tour to see the Taj.
Yeah, to be okay. Every.
So I don't even go on conducted tours for a holiday. I like to do my own stuff. So I would rather go to a small mountain and enjoy myself. It doesn't necessarily have to be a high mountain or whatever. As long as we go and have a good experience in the mountain, we are great. We even in our joint expeditions, when we decided to go with the Americans, Don Goodman, he's a great inspiration to me, a wonderful leader in his own right. So he asked me once, Divesh, what is your definition of success? How do we define whether our expedition will be successful or no?
Right.
Are you going to say that if we reach the summit, is it going to be success? What is it? And we sort of discussed this in detail, and we decided that our criteria for success of this expedition is going to be A, that every moment we spend in the mountains, we are going to have a good time. B, we are going to come back as better friends than what we went in.
Yes.
If we are able to achieve a better connection with the mountain, an understanding with the mountain, and we are going to be able to challenge ourselves in any small way or large way, whatever it is,
Right.
and gain a satisfaction, that is success for us. And then if we do summit, that's a bonus.
That's a bonus.
But Kuntal, I'm telling you, this approach that we've had all these years, to tell you frankly, we've achieved more summits because of this than had we been obsessed with the summit.
With the summit itself.
Because it makes us adaptable. It makes us, we can change our plans anytime we want. We don't get obsessed by any one summit. Because many times when you go on an exploratory mountain expedition, you may have thought that you'll climb peak A. But when you go and you find that the physically you find the conditions are not good, or like in Angtung Valley, there's rockfall happening.
Right.
You can't approach the mountain safely.
Right.
We are absolutely fine to switch over and do something else.
Something else.
It's okay, because ultimately that's what we are there for, to enjoy the mountain. So we found this very, very good, and it has sustained us over the years. We have built up great friendships. We've always enjoyed ourselves coming back, and never had to look back with regret on anything.
Wow, that is amazing. I think the point you made, if the objective of the expedition is, or how you define the success of the expedition, I think is a lot clearer.
Yes.
Where you are more connected to the mountain, you are challenging yourself. So that is your objective of the expedition. Then success is automatically going to anyways come. And plus, I think there's lesser pressure also, right? You go on an expedition. If you don't submit, it's okay. You will go back again the next year. You are alive. You are better because you have realized what went wrong, how you can get better. Imagine if you're obsessed and you go and get yourself killed. Yeah, what? You're done now. You're never going to climb a mountain in your life, ever. Or if you lose your fingers or if you lose your toes, nothing's going to grow back ever again. So, amazing. I do want to, I do have a couple last things, to discuss with you. One is, I remember having a conversation with you before where you had mentioned that you like giving newcomers or aspiring, climbers a chance on, your expeditions. So, if, there is an aspiring climber out there, or, there are so many people today who get, interested in climbing mountains or trekking in the mountains, and their only thought process is, मैं पंगार चूला करूंगा, और मैं स्टोक कांगरी करूंगा, and then मैं सीधा एवरेस्ट जाऊंगा. And that's how their aspiration is, कि ये मेरा thought है, कि मैं यहाँ से जाऊंगा. What would your advice be to some of these aspiring, mountain lovers? And I'm not trying to say climbing Everest, ये मत करो, rather क्या करो? Like, what would your advice be?
So my advice is that you need to build up your skill sets first. As a mountaineer, you need to build up your skill sets, your knowledge of the mountains, and your knowledge of yourself, your technique, your safety skills, use of your equipment. So this comes over a period of time with experience.
Right.
I mean, we've all done our mountaineering courses, and they're great, but they have their limitations.
Right.
That it's only that much that you can be taught over a 1 month course with 50, 100 other student participants. But that is necessary, but that's not the end of it.
Right.
That's the beginning.
Advance किया तो मैं सीधा एवरेस्ट जा रहा हूँ.
No, that's the beginning.
Right.
That's just the beginning. They've just introduced the mountains to you.
Right.
So what you really need to do is to build up your skill sets. And apart from technical climbing, apart from your physical ability to climb, you need to develop your decision-making powers. At what point of time, what decisions to take. And the most critical decision is when to turn back.
Now.
I mean, that's what keeps us alive.
Right.
So this comes over a period of time with experience. So I've always, I mean, we've mentored many of the climbers because as you said, most expeditions we encourage somebody new to join us so that they get exposure to mountaineering, and they have 1 month then to chew our brains to learn something.
Right.
And sometimes it is the other way around. A fresh outlook, we also learn.
Right.
So it's not that it's a one way.
One way, correct.
When you talk and somebody asks you a question, you also start thinking, okay, why not this?
Why not this? Right.
And you get in touch with what is happening in the new with the younger climbers and how they are progressing. But it's important for them to get that actual experience in the mountain in a little safer environment and build up these skills. And then slowly they can go off on their own.
Right.
But it all boils down as to what is your intention for mountaineering. What is it that you are in the field of mountaineering? Are you coming into the mountains to enjoy the mountains? Are you coming into the mountains for because you want to achieve something and prove yourself to somebody? Are you doing it because if you climb this mountain, you're going to get some promotion or you're going to get a monetary reward? Yeah.
Or a job or a reward.
No. Unfortunately, I'm saying, using the word very clearly, unfortunately in India, this tendency is there of giving rewards and awards to people who climb Everest and other 8,000 meter peaks.
Right.
So there are people who only see that. They think that I will climb Everest, then I will get a promotion because they have got a government job or whatever. Or I will climb Everest and I will become famous. I will start giving inspirational talks, have my YouTube channel or X, Y, or Z or whatever. This is how I'll become famous. So if that is your intention, then you may go down a different path.
Right.
But if your intention is to really explore the mountains and in the process explore yourself, it's an internal journey which you're taking. What are my limits? What can I do? What I can't do? And how do I push these limits? Then this is something very personal to you. Mountaineering is a very personal experience, actually speaking. Because, okay, I have this discussion with many of my friends also. Okay, you've gone and climbed Everest. You've gone and you're the first so-and-so to go and climb something. How long does that fame last? I mean, yeah, you'll get applause. People will say, fantastic, you've done a great job. But okay, after a month,
yeah,
it's gone. That's it. And then you want to outdo that again because you have to do something now even which is more dramatic or which is another first.
Something outrageous.
So it's leading you to compete.
Yeah.
And basically, I don't see competition in the mountains.
At all.
I don't see competition. If you're doing anything, it's for yourself, not for somebody else.
Superb. This was amazing. I'm just going to ask last one question.
Yeah.
And if you can answer it in like maybe a line max. Why do you climb mountains? I know we have discussed this whole thing, but if the very first thing, why do you climb mountains?
It's just that I'm very passionate about the mountains and the Himalayas.
Super.
That's it.
Thank you so much, Divyesh. Thank you so much for sharing all your incredible stories. I do think we can do one more episode. Just now that we have set the context and set the base, we can just do one more podcast just talking about the expeditions itself and just talking about the stories from the expeditions, because I think we were not able to cover a lot of detailed stories in this one. But just sit and two people sitting in a tent and waiting for a summit window to open and have hours and hours to kill. And how they would tell their stories. Arey, ye hua tha. Arey, ye hua tha. Arey, ye hua tha. Maybe a podcast like that.
That's how we spend time in base camps.
Telling stories about
the exchange stories.
40 plus years of climbing. Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Divyesh.
Thank you, Kuntal. It's amazing having talked to you.